When Marcus Thompson walked into Riverside Elementary with paint-stained work clothes and apologetic eyes, everyone assumed they knew his story. A struggling single father barely keeping his head above water. But sometimes the most broken-looking people are actually the strongest. And sometimes it takes just one person to see past the surface to change everything. If you enjoy stories about second chances and seeing the good in others, feel free to subscribe. It really helps the channel. By the way, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? None of them knew that a simple parent-teacher conference would soon reveal secrets that would shake the entire town of Riverside. Marcus rushed through the double doors of Riverside Elementary 15 minutes late, his steel-toed boots echoing against the polished linoleum floors. Paint splattered his work shirt, and dust from the construction site still clung to his dark hair. Other parents in their pressed business suits and designer dresses turned to stare as he hurried past, their whispered conversations following him like shadows. "Mr. Thompson?" Principal Morrison appeared in her office doorway, her smile tight and professional. The disapproval in her eyes was barely concealed behind wire-rimmed glasses. "We've been waiting." "I'm so sorry," Marcus stammered, running a hand through his dusty hair. The job at the Henderson house ran late, and traffic on Route 9 was backed up because of construction. "It's quite all right," she interrupted, though her tone suggested otherwise. "These things happen with certain families." As Marcus followed her toward the main office, he caught fragments of conversations from other parents waiting in the hallway. Something about responsibility, something about priorities. His cheeks burned with familiar shame, but he kept walking, focusing on why he was here. Emma. Behind the reception desk, Mrs. Chen was organizing parent files when one slipped from her hands. Papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Marcus instinctively bent to help gather them, his heart sinking as he recognized the letterhead. Past due lunch payment notices, a note about Emma's worn shoes, and a concerning report about his daughter's recent withdrawal in class. Principal Morrison's expression hardened as she noticed the scattered documents revealing the Thompson family's financial struggles. Her lips pursed into a thin line of judgment. "Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss more than just Emma's grades today." The walk down the hallway toward Emma's classroom felt endless. Marcus's boots squeaked against the freshly waxed floor as they passed colorful bulletin boards displaying student artwork. He spotted one of Emma's drawings immediately. A house with oversized windows and a smiling sun, signed in her careful fourth-grade handwriting. The sight made his chest tight, with both pride and overwhelming worry about what the teacher might say about his parenting. Sarah Mitchell's classroom was a revelation. Where Principal Morrison's office felt sterile and judgmental, this space radiated warmth and creativity. Colorful posters covered every wall, student work was displayed with obvious care, and natural light streamed through windows lined with plants. A young woman with kind brown eyes and shoulder-length hair pulled back in a simple ponytail stood from behind a desk covered in graded papers. "You must be Emma's father," she said, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. Thank you so much for coming today." Her handshake was firm and confident, and for the first time since entering the school building, Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Sarah gestured to a small round table with adult-sized chairs, clearly set up specifically for parent conferences, rather than making parents squeeze into tiny student desks. "I have to tell you," Sarah began, pulling out a thick folder filled with Emma's work. "Emma is absolutely one of my favorite students this year. Her creativity and imagination are just remarkable." She handed Marcus a piece of paper covered in Emma's neat handwriting. The title read, "My Dad the Hero," and as Marcus read the words his daughter had written about him, his eyes began to blur with unexpected tears. Emma had described how he worked hard every day to take care of her, how he made the best pancakes on Sunday mornings, and how he was teaching her to be brave and kind like him. "She sees you as her whole world," Sarah said softly, watching Marcus's emotional reaction. "That kind of love and security, that's not something you can fake or buy with money. That's earned through consistency, sacrifice, and genuine care." For the first time in months, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. Here was an adult who saw Emma, really saw her, and by extension, saw something good in him too, rather than just focusing on their struggles and limitations. Sarah showed him more of Emma's work, drawings of their small apartment that somehow looked cozy and full of love despite its modest size, math problems solved with creative illustrations that showed real understanding, and a science project about monarch butterflies that demonstrated genuine curiosity about the natural world. "She's incredibly bright and emotionally intelligent," Sarah continued, her voice filled with admiration. "But I've noticed she seems more anxious lately, more withdrawn than she was when school started in September." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Marcus, I need to ask you something personal about Emma's recent creative writing assignments. She's been writing stories about waiting for someone special to come home. Is there something happening in your family that I should know about?" Marcus's throat went dry as he thought about the job interviews he'd been attending after work, the second position he'd been considering at Pete's auto shop, and all the times Emma had asked why he seemed so worried lately. He'd tried desperately to shield her from their financial struggles, but clearly, his perceptive daughter was more aware of their situation than he'd realized. As they walked toward the school exit together, Marcus felt lighter than he had in weeks. Sarah had seen Emma's potential, had treated both of them with genuine respect and kindness, and had made him feel like a good father rather than a failure. But the positive feeling didn't last long. In the main hallway, other parents clustered in small groups near the trophy case, their voices carrying just loud enough to be clearly overheard. "That's him," Linda Hartwell whispered loudly to Patricia Barnes, pointing in Marcus's direction. "I saw his beat-up truck at the unemployment office last Tuesday afternoon." "And look at those work clothes," Patricia added, not even attempting to lower her voice. "That poor little girl has been wearing the same pair of shoes since September started. It's really quite sad." Marcus's face burned with shame and anger. He quickened his pace toward the exit doors, hoping to escape before Emma appeared from the after-school program and witnessed this humiliation. But Sarah stepped closer to him in the hallway, a subtle gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by the gossiping parents watching their every move. "Some people," Sarah said, just loud enough for the others to hear, "judge a book by its cover and completely miss the most beautiful stories inside." Just then, Emma burst through the doors of the multi-purpose room where the after-school program met, her pink backpack bouncing as she ran toward Marcus with pure, unfiltered joy lighting up her face. "Daddy!" She threw her arms around his waist in a fierce hug, completely oblivious to the tension crackling in the hallway around them. "Hey there, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion as he hugged her tight against him. "How was after-school program today?" "It was great. We made friendship bracelets out of embroidery floss, and I made one for you and one for Miss Mitchell because she's so nice to me." Emma looked up at Sarah with bright, trusting eyes. "Daddy, did you tell Miss Mitchell about our special surprise yet?" About why we've been saving all our pennies in the big jar? Friday evening at Mel's Diner on Main Street buzzed with the usual weekend crowd. The red vinyl booths were filled with families enjoying comfort food, and the air smelled of fresh coffee and homemade pie. Marcus sat across from Emma in a corner booth, watching her carefully color on the paper placemat while they waited for their food. This dinner out was a rare treat, paid for with his last $20 bill, but Emma's excitement made every penny worth it. "Daddy, look!" Emma held up her drawing of a butterfly with elaborate purple wings. "Miss Mitchell taught us about monarch butterflies today. Did you know they fly all the way to Mexico?" "That's amazing, sweetheart," Marcus replied, marveling at her detailed artwork. "You're getting so good at drawing." At a table near the window, Sarah Mitchell sat alone with a stack of papers to grade, occasionally glancing up from her work. When she noticed Marcus and Emma, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. She waved at them, and Emma immediately waved back with enthusiasm. "Miss Mitchell! Miss Mitchell!" Emma called out, bouncing in her seat. "Come sit with us!" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then gathered her papers and approached their table. "Are you sure I'm not interrupting your special dinner?" "Please join us," Marcus said, sliding over to make room. Emma would love the company, and honestly, so would I. As Sarah settled into the booth beside Emma, the conversation flowed naturally. Emma chattered excitedly about her school projects. Sarah shared funny stories about her other students, and Marcus found himself relaxing for the first time in weeks. The warmth between them was obvious and genuine, but it didn't go unnoticed by other diners in the restaurant. Linda Hartwell and Patricia Barnes sat 3 tables away, their voices carrying across the small dining room despite their attempts at discretion. Other customers began turning to stare at the unusual trio, their expressions ranging from curious to disapproving. "Well, would you look at that?" Linda whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "The new teacher certainly doesn't waste time getting cozy with certain parents." "It's rather inappropriate, don't you think?" Patricia added, her voice dripping with false concern. "I mean, what kind of message does this send to the other children and families?" Emma, oblivious to the growing tension, continued chattering about her butterfly project, while Sarah helped her with the more difficult words. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he noticed more people staring, but Sarah seemed determined to ignore the whispers and focus entirely on Emma. The moment of peace shattered when Linda Hartwell approached their table with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah, dear," she said in a voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "As someone who's lived in Riverside much longer than you have, I feel I should warn you about getting too personally involved with certain families. People in small towns talk, you know, and reputations matter." Marcus felt his face burn with humiliation. Emma looked confused by the sudden tension, her innocent eyes darting between the adults. Sarah's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Linda continued her calculated assault. "Of course, I'm sure you mean well, but there are appropriate boundaries between teachers and parents. We wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong impression about your motivations." The entire restaurant had gone quiet, all eyes focused on their table. Marcus wanted to disappear, to grab Emma and escape this public shaming, but Sarah surprised him by reaching across the table and gently touching his hand. "Thank you for your concern, Linda," Sarah said with quiet dignity, "but I'm perfectly capable of maintaining professional relationships while also treating people with basic human kindness." Saturday morning brought devastating news. Marcus arrived at the Thompson construction trailer to find his boss, Ray Kowalski, waiting with an uncomfortable expression and a pink slip in his weathered hands. The cramped office smelled of coffee and cigarettes, and Marcus's co-worker, Pete Martinez, sat at his desk, deliberately avoiding eye contact. "Marcus, I'm really sorry about this," Ray began, his voice heavy with reluctance. "Business has been slow with winter coming on, and I have to cut back on hours. Significantly." Marcus stared at the paper in his hands, his stomach dropping as he saw his weekly hours reduced from 40 to 15. It wasn't enough to cover rent, let alone food and Emma's school expenses. "Ray, you know I'm a good worker. I'm always on time, I never complain." "This isn't about your work ethic," Ray interrupted, but something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. "It's just business decisions. You understand." After Ray left for a job site meeting, Pete finally looked up from his paperwork with guilty eyes. "Marcus, there's something you need to know. This isn't just about slow business." "What do you mean?" Pete glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Linda Hartwell's husband owns Hartwell Properties. They're our biggest client, and word got back to them about you, bothering the new teacher at the school." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Bothering her? We just had dinner at Mel's with Emma. There was nothing inappropriate about it. I know that, and you know that. But Linda Hartwell has influence in this town. She told her husband that you were harassing a teacher, and he threatened to pull their contracts if Ray didn't do something about it." The injustice of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd done nothing wrong except try to give his daughter a normal evening out, and now he was being punished for the crime of existing in the same space as someone who showed them kindness. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Can we talk? I heard what happened with your job. This is my fault, isn't it?" Marcus stared at the message, torn between gratitude that she cared and despair that her association with him was causing problems for her too. He typed back, "Not your fault. Some people just don't like families like ours." But even as he sent the message, Marcus knew their troubles were far from over. In a town like Riverside, where everyone knew everyone's business, there was nowhere to hide from the consequences of crossing the wrong people. Sunday morning at Riverside Community Church was typically a peaceful affair, but Marcus felt anything but peaceful as he and Emma walked through the heavy wooden doors. Emma had begged to attend because she wanted to see her Sunday school friends, and despite his better judgment, Marcus couldn't deny her this small piece of normalcy. The sanctuary was filled with familiar faces, most of whom had already formed opinions about the Thompson family, based on gossip and assumption. Marcus and Emma found seats in the back, hoping to avoid attention, but their plans changed when Emma spotted Sarah sitting alone in the middle section. "There's Miss Mitchell," Emma whispered excitedly, waving enthusiastically. Sarah turned and smiled, gesturing for them to join her. Against his better judgment, Marcus allowed Emma to lead him to Sarah's pew, where they sat together like a small family unit. The service proceeded normally until Pastor Williams announced the upcoming holiday charity drive. As he spoke about helping families in need during the difficult winter months, Marcus noticed several congregation members turning to stare at him with thinly veiled pity and judgment. "We're looking for donations of warm clothing, especially children's items," Pastor Williams continued. "And of course, monetary contributions are always welcome for families facing hardship." The pointing and staring became more obvious. Marcus felt like an exhibit in a museum, a living example of the kind of family the church was supposed to help. His face burned with shame as he realized Emma was beginning to notice the attention too. After the service, the situation deteriorated rapidly. As families gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and cookies, Linda Hartwell made a production of approaching the donation table with several bags of children's clothing. "These are gently used items from my own grandchildren," she announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I thought they might be useful for families who might need them." Her eyes found Marcus and Emma across the room, and her meaning was crystal clear. Several other parents followed her gaze, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve, confusion evident in her voice. "Daddy, why is everyone looking at us? Did we do something wrong?" Before Marcus could answer, Emma made the situation infinitely worse by addressing Sarah in her clear, innocent voice. "Miss Mitchell, would you like to come to our apartment sometime? I could show you my art supplies and the bookshelf Daddy built for me." The fellowship hall went silent. Every conversation stopped as Emma's words revealed the extent of their modest living situation to the entire congregation. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him as dozens of pairs of eyes fixed on his family with renewed interest and judgment. Patricia Barnes whispered something to a group of mothers near the coffee table, and they all turned to stare at Sarah with disapproving expressions. One mother, Jennifer Walsh, took her daughter's hand and led her away from Emma, saying in a voice meant to be overheard, "Come along, sweetie. We need to be careful about the children we spend time with." Emma's face crumpled with confusion and hurt. She didn't understand why her innocent invitation had caused such a reaction, but she could sense the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. Marcus felt his heart break as he watched his daughter's joy transform into bewilderment and shame. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, ignoring the disapproving stares from the other adults. "I would love to see your art supplies sometime, Emma. You're such a talented artist." But even as she spoke the kind words, Marcus could see the damage spreading like ripples in a pond. Sarah's association with their family was becoming a liability that could destroy her reputation and career in this small, unforgiving town. As they prepared to leave the church, Marcus overheard Linda Hartwell speaking to Pastor Williams near the front door. "I'm just concerned about the message we're sending to our children when certain teachers show such obvious favoritism to troubled families. It creates an uncomfortable dynamic for everyone involved." Pastor Williams nodded thoughtfully, his expression troubled as he glanced toward Marcus and Emma. "I understand your concerns, Linda. Perhaps we should discuss this matter further during the week." Marcus realized with growing dread that their troubles were escalating beyond simple gossip. The forces aligned against them were powerful and determined, and Sarah was being drawn into their crosshairs simply for showing his family basic human kindness and respect. Principal Morrison's office felt colder than usual Monday morning as Sarah sat across from the imposing mahogany desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. The morning sun streamed through Venetian blinds, casting harsh shadows across the room. Linda Hartwell sat smugly in the corner chair like a predator who had finally cornered her prey, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse. "Miss Mitchell," Principal Morrison began, her voice carrying the weight of administrative authority, "we've received several formal complaints from concerned parents regarding your conduct with the Thompson family." Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady and professional. "What specific complaints, Principal Morrison?" Linda leaned forward with barely concealed satisfaction, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "The kind that suggest you've completely forgotten the appropriate boundaries between teachers and parents." Professional relationships, Sarah. Surely they covered that extensively in your education training. I've done absolutely nothing inappropriate, Sarah replied firmly, meeting Linda's gaze without flinching. I've simply treated a student and her father with the basic respect and dignity that every family deserves. Morrison slid a manila folder across the polished desk with deliberate precision. Inside were photographs that made Sarah's stomach lurch. Images of her and Marcus at Mel's diner sharing a meal with Emma, sitting together during Sunday church service, walking out of the school building side by side. Innocent moments of human connection had been twisted into something sinister by whoever had been stalking them with a camera. These images suggest otherwise, Miss Mitchell, Morrison said, her tone growing icier. Several parents have expressed serious concerns that your obvious personal feelings may be compromising your professional judgment regarding Emma Thompson's academic progress and treatment. Sarah stared at the photographs, feeling violated and angry. Someone had been following them, documenting their every interaction like evidence of some terrible crime. The invasion of privacy felt almost as devastating as the false accusations themselves. Furthermore, Linda added with obvious relish, savoring every word, there are legitimate concerns about the message this sends to other families in our school community. What kind of example are we setting when teachers show such blatant favoritism to certain parents based on personal attraction rather than professional standards? Emma Thompson is a bright, talented, creative child who deserves every opportunity to succeed and thrive, Sarah said, her voice rising slightly with passion. If treating her with kindness and recognizing her potential constitutes favoritism, then I'm proudly guilty as charged. Morrison held up a hand for silence, her expression grave. Miss Mitchell, until this investigation is thoroughly completed, you are strictly forbidden from having any contact with the Thompson family outside of absolutely required school business. Effective immediately, Emma will be transferred to Mrs. Henderson's 4th grade class. The words hit Sarah like a devastating physical blow. Emma, who had just started to trust adults again, who looked forward to their daily conversations about books and art and dreams, would be torn away from the one stable, supportive adult relationship she had managed to build at school. You cannot do this to her, Sarah whispered, her professional composure finally cracking. She's already dealing with so much instability and financial stress at home. This will destroy her sense of security. That, Linda said with cold satisfaction, is exactly the problem we're trying to address. You've become far too emotionally invested in this family's personal problems. That evening, Sarah paced her small rental house like a caged animal, her phone pressed against her ear as she spoke with her sister Julie in distant Chicago. Rain drummed steadily against the windows, matching the storm of emotions churning violently inside her chest. Sarah, honey, you really need to think carefully about your career prospects here. Julie's voice crackled through the speaker with obvious concern. Small towns have incredibly long memories about these kinds of scandals. Is this really the hill you want to die on professionally? You don't understand the situation, Julie, Sarah said, stopping abruptly in front of her living room window. Emma isn't just any ordinary student. She's genuinely brilliant with this incredible imagination and artistic talent. And her father, Marcus. He's absolutely nothing like what these small-minded people think he is. But realistically, what can you actually accomplish? You're just one person going up against an entire established community power structure. Sometimes you have to pick your battles strategically and live to fight another day. Through the rain-streaked window, Sarah watched Marcus and Emma walking slowly home from the grocery store, Emma trying valiantly to hold a broken umbrella over both of them, while Marcus carried heavy bags that probably contained whatever food items they could afford. Even from this distance, Sarah could see the bone-deep exhaustion in Marcus's shoulders, the way he tried desperately to shield Emma from both the cold rain and the crushing weight of their daily struggles. Emma looked smaller somehow tonight, her usual bright energy dimmed by the confusion of being suddenly transferred from her favorite teacher's classroom without any real explanation that made sense to a 9-year-old mind. Marcus glanced up at Sarah's house and caught sight of her silhouette framed in the warm yellow light of her window. For a long moment, their eyes met across the rainy distance between them. He raised his hand in a small, defeated wave, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both deep gratitude for her kindness and weary resignation to the harsh reality that the world would always be stacked against families like his. In that crystalline moment of connection, Sarah saw everything with perfect clarity. She saw Emma's confused, hurt face when she had been told she was switching classes. She saw Marcus working exhausting double shifts to pay for basic school supplies, while other parents complained bitterly about his appearance. She saw the toxic, self-perpetuating cycle of judgment and prejudice that would continue indefinitely unless someone finally had the moral courage to stand up and break it. "Julie," Sarah said suddenly, grabbing her car keys from the coffee table with trembling but determined hands. "Some things in life are infinitely more important than keeping your head down and protecting your own interests. I'm going to do what I should have done from the very beginning." "Sarah, what are you planning to do?" "Don't make any rash decisions you'll regret." But Sarah had already hung up the phone, her mind completely made up. She had become a teacher to help children like Emma, not to bow submissively to prejudice and cruel small-town gossip. The Riverside Community Center buzzed with typical monthly town council meeting energy when Sarah slipped quietly through the back entrance. Folding chairs were arranged in neat, precise rows facing a long table where council members sat with their official papers and steaming coffee cups. Linda Hartwell was already addressing the assembled crowd about maintaining appropriate community standards and protecting our children's educational environment from inappropriate influences. "It's absolutely crucial," Linda was saying with practiced authority, her voice carrying clearly across the room, "that we ensure our school staff thoroughly understand the proper boundaries of professional conduct. When teachers become too personally and emotionally involved with certain troubled families, it creates an extremely uncomfortable dynamic that negatively affects our entire school community." Several parents throughout the audience nodded their heads in solemn agreement, their faces showing the kind of righteous certainty that comes from believing they're courageously protecting their children from some unnamed but terrible threat. Sarah's hands trembled violently as she stood up from her back row seat, her metal chair creaking loudly in the sudden, expectant silence. "Excuse me, may I please speak?" The entire room turned as one to look at her with surprised expressions, shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd like disturbed water. Principal Morrison sat rigidly in the third row, her face becoming a mask of barely contained panic as she realized her problem teacher had just walked directly into the lion's den. "Miss Mitchell," Mayor Davidson said from the head table, adjusting his reading glasses with obvious nervous discomfort, "you're certainly welcome to speak during our public comment period, but I should warn you that anything you say here tonight will become part of the official public record." "Thank you for that warning, Mayor Davidson." Sarah walked slowly but steadily to the front of the room, her heart hammering so hard against her ribs that she was certain everyone in the building could hear it. She turned to face the assembled audience, seeing a complex mixture of curious faces, openly hostile stares, and a few genuinely sympathetic expressions from people she had met around town. "I've lived in Riverside for only 4 months," she began, her voice much stronger and more confident than she actually felt inside. "But I've already learned something profoundly important about this community. We have an absolutely incredible capacity for genuine kindness and compassion. But sometimes we allow fear and unfounded judgment to cloud our vision of what really matters most." She paused deliberately, gathering her courage as she looked directly at Linda Hartwell's increasingly angry and flushed face. "I want to talk honestly about Marcus Thompson and his daughter Emma. I know many of you have already formed strong opinions about them based on his work clothes, his truck, their modest living situation, and various rumors that have been circulating around town." "Now see here," Linda interjected sharply, rising from her seat with obvious indignation. "This is hardly the appropriate forum for—" "What's truly inappropriate," Sarah continued with growing strength and conviction, "is judging any human being's worth and character by external circumstances completely beyond their control. Marcus Thompson is genuinely one of the most dedicated, loving, selfless fathers I have ever encountered in my 5 years of teaching." The room had gone completely silent except for the soft humming of the heating system. Sarah could see Pastor Williams nodding slowly and thoughtfully in the front row, and Mel Rodriguez from the diner was leaning forward with obvious, genuine interest. Marcus Thompson gave up a full scholarship to art school to raise his daughter when her mother abandoned them both. He works construction during the day and spends his evenings patiently helping Emma with homework, reading stories to her, and creating beautiful art projects that would absolutely amaze you with their creativity, love, and attention to detail. Just then, the community center doors opened with a soft whoosh of cold evening air, and Marcus walked in confidently with Emma's small hand clasped firmly in his larger one. He had clearly rushed directly here from his construction job, still wearing his work clothes, but his face showed determined pride, rather than the usual shame and defensiveness. "I heard you were speaking up for us," Marcus said simply, as he walked steadily down the center aisle, his work boots echoing clearly in the hushed room. Emma looked around with wide, curious eyes, not fully understanding the adult tension crackling through the air, but sensing instinctively that something very important was happening that involved the two people she cared about most in the world. Linda Hartwell stood up abruptly, her face flushed bright red with anger and public embarrassment. "This is completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Miss Mitchell should be terminated immediately for this outrageous display." But Pastor Williams rose slowly from his front row seat, his weathered face thoughtful and his voice carrying the natural authority of someone who had spent decades counseling families through their most difficult struggles and challenges. "Linda," he said quietly but firmly, "I think before we make any hasty decisions that we might later regret, we should give Mr. Thompson the opportunity to speak for himself and tell his own story." 6 months later, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The former storage room in Riverside Elementary's basement had been converted into a bright, welcoming art studio that buzzed with creative energy. Large windows had been installed to flood the space with natural light, and colorful student artwork covered every available wall surface alongside inspirational quotes about creativity, perseverance, and believing in yourself. Marcus stood confidently at the front of the room, no longer wearing paint-stained work clothes, but a clean button-down shirt and dark jeans that made him look every inch the professional educator he had become. His hands, still strong from years of construction work, now guided small fingers with infinite patience as children learned to hold paintbrushes properly and shape modeling clay into their imaginative creations. "Remember what we always say," he told a group of enthusiastic third graders clustered around a table covered with art supplies. "There's absolutely no such thing as a mistake in art. Sometimes what you initially think went wrong becomes the most beautiful and interesting part of your entire creation." Emma sat proudly at a corner workstation, no longer just his daughter, but his unofficial teaching assistant, helping younger children mix paints and organize supplies. Her face absolutely glowed with pride as she watched her father work patiently with the other kids, finally receiving the respect and admiration she had always known he deserved. Sarah entered the sunny classroom, carrying permission slips for the upcoming community art show. Her new role as arts program coordinator, allowing her to collaborate closely with Marcus again. The investigation into her conduct had been quietly dropped after the overwhelming wave of community support that followed the memorable town council meeting, and Principal Morrison, faced with dozens of parents specifically requesting enrollment in the popular new art program, had grudgingly created Sarah's expanded position. "How did the wood carving demonstration go with the fifth graders?" Sarah asked warmly, approaching Marcus as children worked happily on their individual projects throughout the room. "Better than I could have possibly imagined," Marcus replied, wiping wood shavings from his hands with obvious satisfaction. Tommy Henderson actually sat completely still and focused for 30 minutes straight. "I think we might have discovered a future master woodworker." Principal Morrison appeared unexpectedly in the classroom doorway, clipboard in hand, and her usual stern expression noticeably softened by months of witnessing the program's remarkable success with students who had previously struggled in traditional academic settings. "Mr. Thompson," she announced with something approaching a genuine smile, "I have excellent news to share. The school board met last night, and they've unanimously approved funding to make your position permanently full-time. The community art show raised significantly more money than anyone anticipated." Marcus looked up from the intricate carving he was demonstrating, his eyes wide with amazement and disbelief. "Permanent? You mean I'm really staying?" "I mean you are now officially Riverside Elementary's first full-time art and creative expression instructor," Morrison said, extending her hand with newfound respect. "Congratulations, Marcus. You've truly earned this." Emma jumped up excitedly from her corner workspace, nearly knocking over a container of paintbrushes in her unbridled enthusiasm. "Daddy, you did it! You're a real teacher now, just like I always knew you could be." The other children looked up curiously from their projects, sensing the excitement and joy even if they didn't fully understand the significance of the moment. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in spontaneous applause and delighted cheers from young voices. As the final bell rang and the last student was picked up by their parents, Emma approached Marcus and Sarah with a carefully folded piece of paper clutched in her small hands, her expression serious and thoughtful. "I made something special for both of you," she said shyly, unfolding what appeared to be a detailed family portrait drawn in her characteristic, colorful style. The drawing showed 3 figures standing together in front of the school building. Marcus in the center wearing his teaching clothes, Sarah on one side holding art supplies, and Emma on the other side beaming with happiness. Above them all, she had written in her most careful letters, "My real family." Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, her voice gentle but important. "Emma, this is absolutely beautiful and means so much to us. But you understand that Miss Mitchell and your daddy are really just very good friends, right?" Emma looked at both adults with the startling wisdom that sometimes emerges from children who have witnessed life's complexities far too early. "I know that," she said matter-of-factly, her voice filled with certainty. "But good friends can be family too. You both take such good care of me, and you take care of each other." That's exactly what real families do. As afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall classroom windows, casting long golden shadows across walls covered with student artwork, Marcus and Sarah stood side by side watching Emma carefully pin her drawing to the special bulletin board, reserved for the most meaningful projects. In that perfect moment, surrounded by overwhelming evidence of creativity, hope, and transformation that filled every corner of the room, they understood that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones you consciously choose to create. Built not from traditional expectations, but from love, mutual respect, and the moral courage to see beyond surface struggles, to recognize the true worth that lies within every human heart.